the Ghost R1, the newest and most anticipated ITX case from the Swedish maker LOUQE. Today we're covering the good, the bad, and the ugly. Originally slated for 2024, the R1's delivery timeframe slipped further and further back. Despite the rocky rollout, the R1 promises bit cooling and generous hardware support. By the end of this video, we'll see if it delivers. Per LOUQE, the R1 is bead blasted, double etched, and hard anodized aluminum alloy. Like many cases in this category, it's built from individual panels. Two vented side panels, front and rear panels, a structural backplate for ITX motherboards, along with SFX and SFX-L power supplies, top, side, and bottom fan bracket, and a vented black anodized top panel. It weighs 3.6 kilograms, measuring 354 millimeters in the length, 265 millimeters in the height, 187 millimeters in the width. Not exactly a tiny case, but still fits within that compact ITX footprint. There are two finish colors, ash, which is black, and limestone, which resembles a silver color. Cooling support is a headline feature. Official support for larger tower coolers like the Noctua NH-D15 G2, up to two 280mm radiators, and up to 6 140mm fan positions, and one 120mm rear fan position. You can build it in two orientations: flipped with the GPU intaking air from the top, and reference with the GPU's intaking air from the bottom. I'm building in the flip configuration as early testing has shown this to have the best overall thermals. Beyond the panels, you get the power button assembly with a rubber-like membrane over the button's PCB with a bracket for the bottom panel, the rear GPU support bracket, and a GPU sag bracket, a power extension cable with a PSU bracket, a vertical structural support bar, two side fan and radiator brackets, and a mixed hardware kit with 6 and 8mm countersunk M3 screws and 8mm round head screws. Like many small form factor cases, it's much easier to build the case around your components, and in this case, I don't strictly follow the steps in the manual exactly. I find it much easier to start with the rear 120mm fan, securing it to the backplate. For this, I'm using the Noctua NF-A12x25 G2, a fan I recently reviewed on the channel. Being sure to mount it as exhaust. Here I secure the rear panel to the motherboard backplate. After this, you can pretty much stand the case up, which should help you assemble the case from here on out. ASUS sent over their Strix X870i gaming Wi-Fi, a robust board with Wi-Fi 7, and an assortment of USB options including two 40GB Type-C ports and rear CMOS and BIOS flashback buttons. Backed by popular demand, we're using the Ryzen 7 9800X3D, a top-tier gaming chip with that 3D V-cache. Storage is simple. We have the Oracle IG740 Pro, 2TB Gen 4 SSD for games, and my Western Digital SN770 for my Windows OS. For the memory, we have two modules, the Team Group T-Crate Expert 32GB kit at 6000 megatransfers, a relatively low-profile kit which we'll need for our air cooler. To cool the 9800X3D, I have the Noctua NH-D15 G2, and I've been sitting on this cooler for a while waiting for the Ghost R1 to release. With a listed height of 165 to 168mm in height, 8 heat pipes, and the updated NF-A14x25 G2 fans, and this cooler should be more than enough for a gaming CPU. We're going to apply the AM5 mounting brackets, which sport a 7mm offset tailored to the CCD position on AM5 CPUs. Before we fasten down the cooler, I recommend seating the motherboard into the case now. This way we have access to those standoffs. I personally find it easier to install the heatsink with the Noctua logo on the left side, using the two captive screws on the cold plate, applying even pressure. Since the R1 supports up to a SFX-L power supply, that's what we're going with, the ASUS LOUQE 750W SFX-L power supply. With the PSU bracket and 4 screws, you secure it directly to the power supply itself, in which you'll use another 4 screws to secure the PSU to the motherboard backplate. And don't forget the GPU I/O bracket, which also takes another 2 screws. When installing the fans, be sure to attach the push side of the fan to the heatsink. Doing it the opposite way may cause unwanted turbulence, something that Noctua made me aware of after my Ncase M2 Grader and D12L video. TLDR, the exhaust side faces the fans. To fully utilize the GPU clearance the R1 offers, we're using the ZOTAC RTX 5080 AMP Extreme Infinity card. At nearly 4 slots and 348 millimeters long, it just clears the 354 millimeter clearance by 6 millimeters. Next, we have the bottom panel, which does support a 280 millimeter radiator and two 140 millimeter fans. We'll do two things with the bottom panel. One, install the button, and two, install the rubber feet. The rubber feet slide into these rounded cutouts at the bottom, which is kind of difficult, but if you pull it from the inside, it makes it a bit easier. The power button's PCB attaches to its own bracket with 4 screws, and 2 additional screws fasten it to the bottom panel. The power button position will swap between this side or the other side depending on which case orientation you go with. Add the bottom panel with rounded screws. Next is the power extension cable, which do include 2 positions to mount it. You need to add the front panel now, which I must admit is a little bit difficult to do. The tolerances are so tight that you end up scratching parts of your case just trying to get the front panel on. The vertical crossbar is your last structural piece you need to add. After 2 countersunk screws, the case is as solid as a rock. Adding the side intake fan is pretty simple. You just take the 2 radiator/fan brackets and fasten them down to the intake side of the fan with 4 case screws. If you pitch the fan and bracket inward, you should have no problem securing it to the case. It needs to require more rounded head screws. Securing the side panels also come with a bit of difficulty as well, because you have to self-level the panels to get it even with the front and rear panel. Simply just hold it in place and secure down the 4 countersunk screws. That easy. The top panel barely fits, but with a little bit of force you can get it in there and then secure it down with another 4 countersunk screws. Once the last screw goes in, it's really hard not to admire the look of this case. The build is incredibly dense and the noise levels are pretty manageable. I also highly recommend swapping out the case screws for these black hex M3 screws I picked up on Amazon. With the D15 G2's fan set to 850 RPM and the case fan set to 500 RPM, it's barely audible, at 40 decibels or 3 decibels above ambient. Let's take a look at some thermals. In a 10-minute Cinemage R24 run with a Noctua D15 G2, the 9800X3D sits around 70 degrees flipped and 73 degrees in the reference mode, while the 9950X holds 58 to 60 degrees Celsius. That gap is expected. The X3D single VCAS CCD concentrates heat and has a higher thermal impedance, and the chip reports the hottest sensor, whereas the 9950X spreads load across 2 CCDs, lowering the hotspot reading. Orientation doesn't influence throughput. The 9950X scored 2,310 points in both layouts. The 9800X3D hit 1,310 points, pretty stable across the board. We ran Cyberpunk 2077 in 3 resolutions, 4K, 1440p, and 1080p. Looking at the CPU temperatures in 4K flip mode, temps were a touch cooler at 39 degrees versus 41 degrees. At 1440p and 1080p, the flip mode runs 3 to 4 degrees warmer. That's pretty much the trend you will see, as the CPU will perform a little bit better in the reference mode. The flip clearly favors the GPU, 43 to 44 degrees at 4K and 1440p versus 52 and 53 on the reference, and 42 degrees versus 50 degrees at 1080p. There are small but repeatable gains in the flip configuration, 1 FPS lead at 4K, 3 at 1440p, and 6 at 1080p. Cooler GPU temps likely help sustain slightly higher clocks, thus slightly better performance. A 10-minute firmware soak test follows the same trend. The 5080 remains 7 degrees cooler when flipped. Again, in Steel Nomad, we see 7 degrees cooler on the GPU as well, and 2 degrees on the CPU. So what does this mean? The Ghost R1 delivers, especially in the flip configuration, putting the GPU on the top nets up to 9 degrees improvement over the reference. The CPU can be slightly cooler in the reference, but the trade-off isn't worth it. The chassis looks good from a distance and feels solid once assembled, but a few things hold it back. The power button is a big miss in my opinion. It just feels awkward and scratchy. And securing it to the bottom panel just doesn't feel right. Plus, my silver case comes with a gunmetal power button? Question mark? My sample also shows a few inconsistencies on the front and rear panels. I was given the guidance to try rubbing alcohol to remove any residue. No luck. It's etched into the panels itself. My rear panel also sustained some deep scratches just above the exhaust fan. And the crossbar doesn't look any better. Likely tied to packaging that stacked panels with only foam and bubble wrap. A stark contrast from their previous flagship, the Ghost S1. But that was toward the end of its life and it did come pre-assembled. Let's talk about some things I did like. The hardware compatibility is awesome. The side fan and radiator brackets are thick, sturdy, and genuinely useful. The GPU I/O rigidity is excellent as well. The support bracket is almost optional. The thermal and noise performance is also amazing. The success of the Ghost R1 stems heavily on how the manufacturer responds to the community feedback. As shipments began in mid-2025, early buyers reported cosmetic issues and even structural damage for a select few. They've made several statements on the community Discord server, but no public statements on their website yet. For now, we will have to see. If you are still interested in buying the Ghost R1, I recommend waiting after the batch 2 drop to see if the issues have been rectified. At $299 US, do you think it's worth it? With $55 less, you can get the Encase M3. Alright, that's all I have for you guys. Thank you for watching, and please like, comment, and subscribe if you like what you've seen here. Thanks, have a nice day.